Well, thank you, Jeff, and great to be with you tonight. I really appreciate the invitation. Thank you, Roger. I live down the hill from y'all at 8th and Olive. I've been down there for about 11 years. Raised my kids down on that intersection. They're 13 and a half now. I've got twin, a boy and a girl, Avery and Parker. One's at soccer practice. I think one I left tutoring. I said, fend for yourself for dinner, figure it out. But it's been fun to watch them grow up in this very urban place. We moved downtown when they were about 2 and a half. And my wife said, we'll be down there until they go into kindergarten, and then we're leaving, and we're going to go to some other single-family neighborhood in the city of Seattle. And I got the better end of that deal. And she stuck it out, and we've all really grown to love living in this very urban, dynamic environment. We didn't sign up for a pandemic, but none of us did, right? But we're here, and we made it, and I think we're all ready to ride the wave back up to a better time, and some of those memories that we had pre-pandemic of what this neighborhood was all about. I've had this job since 2008. I've had the job since 2014 as a CEO. I've been with the organization since 2008. In 2015, I got to speak at my first State of Downtown event, which is our annual event, reporting on the state of downtown for our membership and others. I declared at that time that I was the luckiest guy in Seattle to have the job that I had. And I still feel that way today, actually. There were a couple of moments during the pandemic I did feel that way. But I still feel that way. I feel really privileged to have this role. I grew up in Tacoma in University Place before it was a city. It was unincorporated Tacoma, so I'm a Northwest kid. And would come up here as a kid with my parents and go to Seattle Center and the market and Cutters and do the things. My parents didn't work up here, but we had a relationship with this place, just thinking this was our downtown, this was the big city in our region, and I loved making that drive up I-5 with my twin sister. I have a twin sister and have twins next to me, and we'd be fighting in the back seat and listening to Air Supply and Whitney Houston, whatever else my mom was playing. And you come over that hill at South Center and you see the big buildings and the Columbia Tower and everything else, and we'd stop fighting and it's like, oh, we're going to the big city. And you get excited about it. And so it's been a thrill to have the privilege of trying to shape and influence this place on behalf of our members and others and our partners, and working with the community to try to influence and shape good things to occur in a place that I grew up loving. And it's been fun to watch my kids grow up absorbing this place and all the different experiences, the good and the bad and the ugly and the great, that have helped shape who they are. You know, there's things that are a little bit different about growing up as a kid downtown that I didn't fully appreciate, but then I appreciated as a parent. Halloween was pretty cool because as a parent in an apartment building, you're not out in the rain. You get to legally carry around a glass of wine. And then you can refill and stop on your floor. It's very efficient and easy to be utilizing a multifamily building for trick-or-treating. Christmas was interesting because I remember when my kids were little and they still believed in Santa, they asked, how does he get into the building? Because we didn't have a fireplace and there's no chimney. So you have to explain that, and we put a sign up on the window, and the windows in the building we lived in at the time opened, and so we'd say, Santa enter here, and we just said, he comes through there. So, you know, there's some things you've got to wrestle with as a parent in an urban location, but we've really enjoyed it, and I think they're better for it. We'll see. They're good little people. But it's great to be with you today. I hope tonight to, one, leave a lot of time for your questions and feedback. I like to come to these things and listen. And understand what's on your mind and be responsive as I can to your questions. And if I can't, I'll follow up and we'll get you the answer and find the right people that know the content and subject matter. But I want to leave a lot of time for your questions. I want to tell you a little bit about the association for those who aren't familiar, kind of who we are, what we do, current state of our downtown, and then share some perspective on how we continue to make progress in revitalizing and restoring this great place that I think we all have a deep affection for, or else we'd be living and spending our time in other places. So Downtown Seattle Association, as Jeff noted, founded in 1958. in a period where we had some other challenges, maybe a little different than the ones we've faced over the last couple of years, but 1958, a lot of investment outside of the city. Bellevue was coming of age. Northgate Mall had recently opened, one of the first indoor malls in North America. So all of this action and investment attention outside of the city. Some business leaders, including the Nordstrom family and property owners, came together to form a nonprofit, recognizing that that downtown Seattle wasn't the only game in town anymore, that they had more competition for restaurants and coming to shop and places to work and arts and entertainment. So they formed an association of business leaders and civic leaders and others to help shape a vision for what happens here and try to influence change and influence good things to ensure continued investment, that it was safe and healthy and welcoming. And downtown has changed quite a bit in those 60 plus years. Our association has changed quite a bit, but the basis of it still remains the same, that one, we believe that a healthy city has a healthy downtown, a healthy region has a healthy downtown. I haven't found that their downtown stinks. It just doesn't usually work that way. So we really believe that a healthy city requires a healthy downtown, and two, that it's not just up to city government, our elected officials and the mayor and the council and others. Those are all great people and we elect them to do important things. But as a community, as business owners, as property owners, as residents, as nonprofit organizations, we all have a stake in this and we have a role to play. And so we've created an organization to assemble those interests, shape a vision, and then take collective action. We really play two roles. One, to provide direct services in the downtown between I-5 and the Water, Denny Way and Pioneer Square, through assessing about 1,250 property owners that are part of the Metropolitan Improvement District. That was an entity created in 1999 by the leadership of the DSA to provide supplemental services to the city of Seattle. And this video does a much better job of explaining what those services are and the accomplishments over the last year than what I could do. I recognize that you are not, at least in this part of town, benefiting directly from those services, but once you cross I-5, you are. And we look forward to opportunities to expand the boundary of that district north and potentially further east in the coming years. But this quick little video gives you a bit of a flavor of what these services are and what the accomplishments over the last year have meant. What is coming next here? YouTube There should be some YouTube setting where you can be like, don't play the next video. There you have it. That's a little bit about who we are, what we do. Those services are funded by 1,250 property owners. Residential, office, retail, hotels, parking garage owners in downtown. that are paying a special assessment every year above and beyond what they pay in general taxes to the city that totals up to about $15.5 million over this past year to provide those services. And in most downtowns around North America now, you've got a district like that where property owners, or in some cases the business tenants themselves, have stepped up to fund an organization in the district to provide a similar set of services. There's about 2,000 of those across North America. Some are organized around a specific neighborhood, think First Hill or the International District. Some are more broadly defined across the entire downtown. We take care of 285 square blocks, 7 days a week. We're on the street about 362 days a year and employ about 130 ambassadors plus 15 on a daily basis security personnel that are under contract. And most of our investment is into clean, safe, security, beautification services in the downtown that, again, are intended to be supplemental to what the city's providing. That's really a core tenet to this whole relationship. We're not in the business of trying to replace city government or spend dollars and then have them take the dollars they were spending downtown and spend them somewhere else. And that relationship and that bargain, frankly, has been a bit challenged over the last few years during the pandemic, but I'm more encouraged that we're getting back on track in having a strong partnership there, where there's a foundational amount of services provided by the city, and then the property owners are providing supplemental services. We're in front of the city council right now to reauthorize this district and this entire entity for another 10-year term. We have to go out every 10 years and ask property owners, do you want to continue to invest in these services? If so, at what amount and what range of services do you want to contribute to? And then once we demonstrate that there's enough support there, we've got to go in front of the city council to get them to act on a piece of legislation. So we're there tomorrow morning in Councilmember Nelson's committee for the second hearing to urge them to act so that we can keep these services in place over the next decade. We expect them to do so. The support has been great. We've been able to turn out lots of residents and arts and cultural leaders and business leaders, property owners, others that really value these services. So I think we're in good shape, but should you want to email your city council that you support renewal of the MID, we encourage you to do that, and you can reach all 9 of them if you email council@seattle.gov. Your voice is important in this, and these services have been really important, especially as we've come out of the pandemic. We felt, unfortunately, that we were sort of the only ones out there for quite some time trying to keep things open and clean and safe and welcoming, and a bit abandoned, frankly, by the public sector during the pandemic. But again, I'm more encouraged by the partnership that we have with the city and some of the actions they've taken recently. So that's a big part of who we are and what we do. We're also a membership association, about 700 companies, organizations, from small businesses, law firms, Amazon, residents, art museums, Plymouth Housing, a collection of stakeholders in the downtown that have an interest in investment in this place, and they want to come together, pool their resources around a vision and a set of actions to make it better. And in addition to the direct services that were covered in the video, we're working every day to influence decisions we can't control, that City Hall has some authority over, or the county or the state. So we have a big public policy agenda, and we work to advocate on behalf of the downtown community and help elect people that share our interest and our set of priorities and our vision for the importance of this place. So that's a bit about who we are and what we do. We came through this pandemic as an organization largely in pretty good shape financially and otherwise. We had healthy reserves. We didn't really have to use them. We didn't take on a lot of debt. The property owners continue to write checks for their assessments. We were able to continue to keep our membership strong. And over the last 6 months, we've gone from having about 38 open positions in our ambassador services out of 130 or so to 0 as of last week. So we've really chipped away to get more of the dollars out on the street, to hire more people, get more services out there to help our downtown. I should note too that our ambassador program from 1999, when this was first created, was really created to be a second chance employment opportunity for folks coming off the street that experienced homelessness, housing instability, folks that had interactions with the criminal legal system, had served time in prison, So we've been really intentional with those 130 plus positions of creating pathways and pipelines to help people find a better way. So they get $20 an hour on their entry level wage. They get the same benefits I do: 401k, bus pass, great healthcare, dental, vision, and we're also providing some housing support to folks in their first couple of months on the job if they don't have stable housing. So we've helped a lot of people over the years get back on their feet, get out of a tent, come off the sidewalk, find their way after being released from prison to get a better pathway for them and their family, and overall for the community. And credit goes to the property owners back in 1999. They set up this program with those goals and intentions in mind. It would have been easy to contract with some cleaning company. There's lots of these groups nationally that work for organizations like us that don't have those same values and principles, but they decided, we're going to run this thing in-house, we're going to employ people, we're going to provide those benefits. So credit to them. So that's a bit about who we are and what we do. And I want to share with you now just a little bit about kind of where the downtown is. This was a brutal 2-3 years. I don't need to recount what we all witnessed. Prior to the pandemic, we were the fastest growing downtown in North America. 20 years of record growth and investment, residential growth, job growth, infrastructure investment, new light rail trains and streetcars. We were rocking and rolling. And you really have to go back 100 plus years in Seattle to find a period of similar growth, investment, and change, really to the early 1900s, when the gold rush was taking place in Alaska, and we had all these people that came here to get provisions and stuff and then get on a boat to go seek a fortune. And that period of 1900 to 1920, this city took off and the downtown took off. And you didn't have a comparable period really until 2000 to 2020. And we all witnessed that, of Amazon deciding to plant its flag in South Lake Union, then expand into the Denny Triangle in 2007, 8, and beyond. They attracted all these other tech companies. We had this residential renaissance, and lots of great things. And we had the good problems that any downtown would love: traffic. Housing affordability was a challenge because the demand was so high. We had, all of our challenges were really driven by people's desire to want to be here. And then March 5th of 2020 hit, and tens of thousands of employees were directed to go home, work from home, work virtually, to help save the healthcare system, to drive down that curve, flatten the curve. We all remember that phrase, and downtown went quiet real fast. We had dozens of hotels that were completely closed. We had permanent closures immediately of some of our restaurants and other retailers that sort of threw in the towels, believing that this thing wasn't going to just be a 2 or 3 week experiment and endeavor. This was going to last some time. And it was a difficult time. We're not used to seeing the streets so quiet, the sidewalks so quiet, not seeing people out there. First, it was, what I noticed was, as a resident downtown, it was like, okay, there's not as many people around. And then a week or so later, you just noticed how quiet it was. And just the sounds of the city weren't there anymore. It was eerie. I don't want to spend any more time on that period than I just did, because we all lived through it. But I think last summer really was a turning point for us. We saw a significant return of visitors to our city. Cruise business was at a record level, the April to October season. Leisure travel, families coming from all kinds of different places for a weekend or a week, was incredibly strong. Conventions were back, not to the level that they were in 2019, but we saw more conventions and some amount of business travel. So the summer really represented, summer of 2022, really represented a turning point. We had some of the highest hotel occupancy of the top 25 markets in the country, beat New York a couple of weeks. We had the second highest hotel occupancy in the month of August compared to 25 top urban markets. And it felt much better. We had a significant return of residents to downtown. During the pandemic, we lost residents for the first time in 30 years. We've been doing this for 30 straight years. Year after year, population growth, the number of people living downtown. In 2020, we saw a dip for the first time. But in 21, 22, we saw a recovery. And today, more people living downtown than ever before. As we got into the fall, we continued with a fair amount of momentum. Our arts and cultural attractions and performance venues were full. The sports events and other things were driving a lot of traffic. The winter has been a little softer when it's come to just feet on the street and our hotel occupancy. We've been down about 20% from where we'd expect to be in the same months and weeks of 2019. And we've been tracking all of these data points on a weekly and monthly basis and producing a monthly dashboard that's available on our website, downtownseattle.org. And this gives you some indication of just, on the left here, total visitors over the course of the last few years. So you can see in the summer of 2022, we almost were back to where we'd expect to be in the summer of 2019. So not quite there, but pretty dang close. What's been a little bit slower and lagging is folks returning to their office. This measures the number of people in their office 3 or more days a week compared to the same week or month in 2019. We're about at 50%. We've been kind of bumping around at 45%, 47%, but generally heading upward and seeing more people returning to their office on a weekly basis. Amazon will be back at 3 days a week starting next week on Monday. They announced that policy about a month ago. That's a good thing. They employ about 55,000 people in downtown Seattle out of a total of about 330,000 jobs assigned to downtown, so they're a big player. And their decision, I think, is going to, and really maybe already has, influenced the decision of other employers to make similar policy changes to their office requirements. I think we're going to see, as we get into the later spring and summer, other employers follow suit with what Amazon is doing. And so I expect that number to continue to inch upward. I don't think we're getting back to the 5-day-a-week work week for most folks, but I think the office is still very relevant to work and culture. I think downtowns generally, and being in person and connecting, whether it's at the restaurant or a meeting space at Wild Ginger or an after-work thing at the art museum, where you're getting your team, your organization, your colleagues together in a fun, exciting, interesting environment in person, not on one of these, is still really important to culture, organizational success, productivity, strategy. So the downtown and I think the office in particular are still really relevant. And I think the longevity of remote work has been a bit overstated. Of course, I've got a bias in that. I want people back in their office. I want people downtown. But I think many people are missing out on being together, particularly the younger generation. And it's interesting to see who is showing up back in the office. I talked to a number of tech leaders who have their offices open, not a requirement that you be there, but it's voluntary and they're serving free food, on Wednesdays or whatever. And the people that are coming back, they say, are the younger people. The people that aren't there are people later in their career. So I think younger people are looking for that mentorship, that guidance to bump shoulders with somebody that might not be on their team, might not be their boss and their direct report necessarily, but somebody they can learn from. And so I think this number continues to go up. I think we get back to a majority of people back in the office a majority of the week. And we're certainly seeing that in other parts of the country. The East Coast is a little ahead of us, the South is a little ahead of us. And you look at other parts of the world too, London and Tokyo and other places, they're much further along than we've been. I think we were in this longer as far as the public health restrictions and mask mandates and vaccine verification. So our exit, particularly our exit to the office, it's interesting that people were fine going to bars and Kraken games and Marin games to Palm Springs, but when you ask them to come back to the office. Not surprising, our hotel room demand has tracked with the visitor demand. We've got more hotel rooms today than we did in 2019. We've had a few open over the last couple of years. But we saw a strong recovery in the summer there of 2022. Again, the softening in the winter relative to what we would expect. And that really is the business travel that's not quite there again, and it's not back, and same with the conventions. We don't have the same number of conventions, and we don't have the same level of attendees. And that's true across the country. That's really an industry-wide phenomenon. It's not a Seattle thing. And again, this is an industry that I remain bullish on. I think, conventions and events were declared dead in 2020. Who's going to go do this again? Why do we need to do this? We can connect online. No one's going to fly to be in some box with a bunch of other people, right? But people are doing that, and we're just having to rebuild the habits and the rhythms and the bookings of associations and industry groups and companies that are getting back to that practice. You know, the hybrid model is certainly harming the number of people that are showing up. We're seeing a lot of companies that will, you know, do an in-person convention, but then they'll broadcast it to whoever wants to tune in. So it does depress attendance, in-person attendance to a degree, but I'm bullish on this industry and the value of connecting and being together for events. And we've got an incredible new facility just down the road from us that's a top 3 facility in the country, tucked into our downtown. It's gorgeous. If you haven't been through that yet, go check it out. It's spectacular. And we're gonna have a bunch of new restaurants and food and beverage operators on the Pine Street side. All Seattle companies, Pike Brewing, Monorail Espresso, an Ethan Stoll restaurant, Broshki, all those folks will be open in the convention center on the Pine Street side later this summer. So we've got a great facility to attract events, and I think we'll continue to see business travel and conventions help us in the winter months, which are traditionally our softer and slower season. And then again, on the residential side, this is the number of occupied apartment units, so it doesn't count condos, but if you add the number of folks living in condos, we've got more people living downtown today than we had prior to the pandemic. 104 or so thousand people between First Hill and the water and Seattle Center and the stadiums. And I think this is, you know, a great sign that the preferences that many of us, not all of us, but many of us have had to want to live in walkable urban places where we have great access to music and restaurants and art and culture. Those preferences really weren't changed by the pandemic. People left in 2020 when all that stuff was closed and you couldn't do it and access it, and the reasons you were here didn't exist. But as soon as we started to see those things reopen, people came back and they continue to do so. And we've got about 7,000 units of housing under construction today in the downtown and are optimistic and encouraged around the demand for urban living. And you know, proximity is valuable once again. It wasn't as valuable when everything was shut down and we all kind of spread out, and you know, you could drive on I-5 and 405 and zip around in 10 minutes and get just about anywhere. Can't do that as well anymore. So proximity and being close to things, being able to walk to them, efficiency, ease of access for medical appointments, healthcare, the pharmacy, going out to dinner, whatever it is, I think is valuable once again. We're bullish that we're going to continue to see strong growth there if we continue to do the right things. So that's a bit of a snapshot of where we are. Again, we're tracking these on a weekly basis. This PDF, if you go to our website, downtownseattle.org, is updated every month and is reporting out on these metrics and a few others. A couple of other areas of progress over the last year or so when it comes to the street environment and public safety and security and the crisis around homelessness. We all saw those issues that were challenges pre-pandemic for downtown Seattle and other parts of our city worsen during the pandemic, no doubt. We had 150 tents in different places on the sidewalks in downtown and in parks. We saw violent crime spike. We saw drug markets and retail theft enterprises sort of take over the real estate and the sidewalks in our downtown. We kind of had this anything goes mentality, and anything went for a good portion of the pandemic. We all kind of witnessed that. We're in a better place today. It's not perfect, but violent crime the first 3 months of this year compared to last year in the core downtown is down about 25%. We have maybe 8 or 9 individual tents throughout the downtown. You don't see big tent encampments like you did in 2020 and 2021 when we had 35 tents on 3rd Avenue between Pike and Union. We had 80 tents in City Hall Park just at the south side of the county courthouse. We had a tent encampment at First and Yesler in Pioneer Park there. We don't see that today. We still certainly see people struggling, sleeping by themselves under a blanket in a doorway or in an alley. We see too much drug use and fentanyl use and sales. And we see a number of people struggling with mental illness. So we still have our work cut out for us. But I'm encouraged by the direction we're heading in, at least, under the leadership of the mayor and the city attorney and Davison and some of our new council members. We're making, I think, the right investments and taking the right action. What concerns me is this crisis around fentanyl that is really our new pandemic. And we've had in the last 3 years, since the start of COVID, in March of 2020, more people in the city of Seattle die from drug overdoses. About 1,250 individuals in our city die from drugs, mostly fentanyl, than we had from COVID, which was about 800. So this is a pandemic level crisis. I don't think we've seen pandemic level leadership yet from our elected officials on this, but it's costing a lot of lives, costing a lot of money, costing a lot of time and energy from our first responders. And the direction we're heading is a really scary one. If you look at the overdose death rates in Seattle and other parts of King County over the last 2 years, the trend line in Seattle is doing this. In North King County, it's largely flat. In East King County, it's largely flat. It's up a little bit in South King County. So we think of this problem as it's a regional thing, it's a King County thing, it's happening everywhere. This is a Seattle crisis, at least right now. It could change, hopefully not for those other parts of the county. But this is a Seattle crisis. Our ambassadors that I referenced earlier began carrying Narcan, the drug that's administered to folks that are overdosing on the street in a nasal application. They began carrying that last June. We've administered it about 140 times since then. Last week, 14 times. And the numbers on a weekly basis are going up. And we didn't have the same number of people in June and July carrying it as we do now. So there's probably lots of times we could have administered it back then, but we've got more people administering it than now than we did previously. So we have sort of a firsthand line of sight on this crisis because it's right in front of us every day, and our folks are often the ones that are first there to somebody who's not breathing. So this is, I think, our current crisis in our community that, it's a moral crisis, it's a health crisis, it's a human crisis, and it's an economic crisis too. Most of us, and I think if you ask most Seattleites, do you want to walk through 12 people smoking fentanyl to get to the restaurant you're going to, or the arts and cultural venue, or the retail shop? They'll probably say, no, I'll go somewhere else, thank you very much. And so I think this is going to keep people from coming back downtown. Now we're moving in the right direction, but this is not a great situation for the revitalization of downtown. And I think there is a sort of a choice for us to make as a community. Either we have a revitalized downtown with arts and culture and great restaurants and all the things we all love about what happens in our downtown, or we have a fentanyl marketplace of people selling, buying, using, smoking, breaking into things to steal, to sell, to buy the next hit. You can't have both. So we have to make a decision here as a community for the economics of our city and the vibrancy, but also the lives that are at risk here in our city. I'm encouraged by what the mayor announced last week. He put forward an executive order to address fentanyl in our city. I think he's highlighting this crisis and hopefully draws in some other leaders to take some action. This is not just the mayor's problem. We need the leadership of the county, public health, the state, the federal government, all the other actors. And we saw that come together during the pandemic, during COVID. We saw everybody sort of marshal their resources to take on this pandemic, to acknowledge what was at stake and the risks and the threat to our healthcare system and the lives in our community. We had this all hands on deck effort, which included everybody in government, plus the private sector and community groups. We need the same approach when it comes to fentanyl. And cities have just never worked well. Downtown certainly never worked well if they weren't first safe and healthy for everybody. So we've got to get that right for the safety and the welfare and the revitalization of our downtown, or people will just make other choices. And we ought to get it right first for the folks that are suffering out on the street, but also for our downtown. And people have more choices today than they ever have before. whether it's where you want to live, where you want to open a business, where you want to shop, where you want to visit, where you want to have your convention, take your family out to dinner. And there's good reasons to choose Seattle. But if the streets aren't safe, if they aren't clean, if they aren't delightful and welcoming for everybody, people will make other decisions, and they have other decisions to make. They can go to Bellevue, they can go to U Village, they can go to Chicago, right? And we want them to choose Seattle. There's great reasons to choose Seattle. So as we look forward and how we continue to sustain progress, ensuring that we're making progress to help those off the street that are most vulnerable, that have substance use disorder, that are mentally ill, to give them the services and housing they need, and then to hold accountable the people that are out there hurting and harming others. We ought to be able to distinguish as a city between those that are hurting and need help, and those that are out there hurting and harming others and need to be held accountable. And for some reason, we've gotten a little paralyzed as a city in our inability to distinguish between the two groups. Therefore, we've sort of done nothing for either. And that was kind of the story of the pandemic. Set up a tent, suffer, harm other people, sell stolen goods, block a doorway, run guns and drugs, and we're just going to let you do it. And we did that for quite some time. Thankfully, I think we're on a better path, and we're, I think, doing a better job of distinguishing between, those that are hurting on the street and need help, and those that are out there harming others and need to be held accountable. So our message to city leadership, to the mayor, the council, the city attorney is job number one's got to be making our downtown safe and welcoming for everybody. We got to get that right. And I think Seattle and our downtown's really in a strong position if we do get that right. We've got a great mix of uses in our downtown. We've never been one-dimensional, and it's not just a place you went to work. We've got great arts and culture. We've got a waterfront in 2025 that's going to open, that's going to be one of the top waterfront parks in North America. We used to compare it to, when we were talking about developing this, it's going to be like the Embarcadero in San Francisco or the Rose Kennedy Greenway in Boston. And no offense to those places, those are great parks and developments. This is going to be at a whole other level. So that's an asset we've got to look forward to. Our sports stadiums are not way off out on the outskirts of town. They're close in, and it helps drive a lot of other activity. And not to pick on San Francisco again, but when there's a 49ers game at Levi Stadium south of downtown, the downtown doesn't feel any of that. The restaurants, the bars, the arts and cultural venues, the hotels, they don't get any of that benefit. But you look at this last Saturday in downtown Seattle, you had the Kraken playing, you had the Sounders, and you had the Mariners. I mean, downtown was alive, and those are fans that are coming before the game, and they're staying after, they're spending dollars in the other attractions, small businesses, and things to do downtown. So we've got this good mix. And I do think the office doesn't go back to exactly how it was, but thankfully we're not oversubscribed to office space in our downtown. About half of all the building square footage in downtown is office, so that's a fair amount. But you compare that to San Francisco, 74% of their building square footage in their downtown is office. And they don't have the same mix of arts and cultural venues and sports stadiums, as I noted. In Boston, it's about 83% of all their buildings are dedicated to office space. So we've been committed for a number of decades of making this not just a place you come to work, not just the central business district, but a place for arts and culture and 18 hours and nightlife and great food and music and great public spaces. And we're doubling down, I think, on that strategy. So I don't know that we need some major remake of this place. I think there's been a lot of conversation of, do the downtowns need to completely reinvent themselves? Well, downtowns have been reinventing for their existence. That's what downtowns do, the adaptability of these places, of cities, of buildings to serve one purpose for a decade or two, and then they transition to another. That's always been happening, and that's a strength of ours. So I don't know that we need some massive, extreme makeover here. I think we need to double down on the basics of what have always been true in creating healthy, thriving cities and downtowns. Make them safe, make them authentic to the place, make sure they're relevant to the diversity of our population and interests within this region, so that young people growing up here and people of all kinds of different races and backgrounds and socioeconomic statuses see themselves here, and they don't just see it as a neighborhood for the rich and famous and wealthy, but they see small businesses and programming in our arts and cultural venues and parks and art that speak to them. And so they show up and help create great things. They have an affection and affinity for it, just like I did when I was growing up. And then maybe one day they want to help make it better as well and contribute in some way. So I think if we can, stick to what's always been true about since the history of time of what has made our cities great, we're going to be okay. And first and foremost, they got to be places where everybody feels safe and that they belong. And I'm inspired by a lot of our history in Seattle and the tough times we faced prior to the most recent few years, and the adversity we've been through and how we've come through it. And you look back on some of those stories, and I'm not here to give any history lesson, but I appreciate the history of the city, which is still a pretty young city relative to other places, relative to San Francisco or certainly places on the East Coast and certainly places other parts of the world. But we've had our moments of turbulence and challenge, whether it was rebuilding after the Great Fire, where we had 25 acres burnt to the ground and 500 buildings gone in a series of 20 hours. And the community at that time came together that night and met the next morning to come up with a plan to rebuild the city, and they did. And our water supply system and the Cedar River watershed and our municipal fire department came out of that challenge. Certainly hosting the World's Fair and the erection of the Space Needle in just 400 days. I mean, imagine that. It was the largest foundation pour for the concrete foundation on the West that had ever been attempted. A big deal in 1962 to do that, secure the land and have that vision, and be able to move from an idea to 400 days to get that thing erected. The train tunnel that was built in 1904, first tunnel under downtown, built by hand, obviously, for the railroad, built in about 20 months, all by hand. And it was the largest diameter tunnel in the country at the time, attempted in Seattle in 1904. And so you think about these moments that we've gotten through, and there's others, right? I mean, the Boeing bust and the flight to the suburbs and all the challenges and adversity and the innovation and resiliency that's come out of this place. So I think we have it in us to come through this period. And I didn't mention the pandemic in 1918, of course, and the effect on the city at that period. So I wouldn't want to be in any other place given the assets that we have, the spirit we have in this city to renew and revitalize. And it's not about going back to where we were, because I think our city was challenged in a lot of ways, certainly pre-pandemic. We had a homelessness crisis, we had a drug crisis, we had crime, and we also had a situation of a lot of people that wanted to take part in this place that were kind of priced out. And so all the tech jobs that have come here, I think, have been phenomenal. I will never think otherwise of a job being created in your city or downtown. That's a good thing. But I think cities like Seattle and San Francisco and others, for all kinds of reasons, became a bit one-dimensional, and they worked really well if you were a highly paid tech worker that could afford a $22 cocktail after work with your friends and could afford the high rent in your brand new apartment and all the other amenities within your neighborhood. But if you didn't fit that demographic and that socioeconomic status, the downtown was becoming harder for you, harder to access, harder to take part in, harder to feel like you belonged. And that's not how our cities and our downtowns were created in this country in the early 1900s, late 1800s. They were places where lots of people had opportunity to come, show up, take part in the commerce and the economy and create things. And small businesses and arts and cultural venues and civic establishments and all these things that we still all benefit and value today. Whether it's the Pike Place Market or the Symphony Hall or that small business down the street that's been there forever. And the porousness of our downtowns and our cities for so long where you didn't get priced out, and they were the places you came to seek your fortune and seek a better life. That has created great cities that we all value, and the fabric and the texture and what's interesting and what's desirable that we all benefit from. And I think cities pre-pandemic, especially these high-flying cities like Seattle, San Francisco, and and the Austins and the Denvers, where a lot of smart people wanted to be and a lot of tech jobs were created. We didn't move fast enough to build enough housing. We didn't move fast enough with strategies to make sure that those places would still be accessible to folks that maybe didn't have a great stock option package and a computer science degree, but that wanted to take part and wanted to contribute and wanted to be part of a place. And that's what's so critical. And I think the function that our center cities still serve, they're really everyone's neighborhood, whether you grew up in University Place and had really no connection to this place, your parents didn't work here, but you grew up in some unincorporated place like I did, south of Tacoma, but you identified with the big city in your region. And I think that's still true today, where we need people to see the center of our city as a place that's their neighborhood too, where we can connect, we can mix and mingle with people that aren't from the same neighborhood and the same school district or school and the same socioeconomic status and the same sports clubs that we might affiliate and be with based on where we live. But it's the place we can come to mix, to celebrate, to have experiences that you can't get anywhere else, to understand each other, what we share in common, and what we have that might be different, but to value that. The downtown serves that, it always has, and I think still remains important. Even in the virtual world, even when we can connect over these things or pick up the phone or whatever channel we want to use, I don't think you can replace being together in person in the heart of our city. And that's what we're about. I think it's why so many people are engaged in trying to revitalize this great place and invite me and people like me to come talk about it. So I appreciate the invitation and look forward to some of your questions and feedback.
So, Nordstrom, I'm concerned about. A lot of the retail stores have closed downtown, and they initially considered this their flagship store. Now they're talking about New York City. What is their opinion? They suffered during Black Lives Matter and all the fires and boarding up the windows, and what do they think?
Well, I certainly appreciate their commitment to downtown. That store was their #1 store for many years pre-pandemic. I think you're right, it's not their #1 store right now. But their doors are open. They're an anchor in our downtown. Certainly, I think they remain committed to our community. They made a number of business decisions in other parts of North America, closing all their Canadian stores. But I don't doubt their commitment to downtown Seattle and that store. We do have a fair amount of vacancies. We had about 500 ground floor closures in the greater downtown. So restaurants and retailers, services that closed over the last couple of years. We've had about 250 new openings and more to come. It's largely been food and beverage, restaurants and bars and cafes. Some retail, but we're going to have to be much more aggressive and intentional about recruiting, going out and telling a story, talking to some of the national chains who have contracted over the last couple of years, but now they are looking for more brick and mortar locations, and they're looking for high quality brick and mortar locations. So we're looking to develop a partnership with the city where we're going out on the road together, and we're going to visit those decision makers and the real estate folks in some of these major retail companies to tell a story about Seattle, that our residential numbers are higher than they've ever been, that we're seeing progress on return to office, that our visitor market is going gangbusters, and some of the things I didn't cover of all the big events that are coming here. World Cup, All-Star Week for Major League Baseball in July, the Winter Classic for the NHL at T-Mobile in January. So we think we got a good story to tell to rebuild retail. We're going to have to work a lot harder at it than we have over the last 20 years.
I just want to encourage you to do that, to encourage retail to come back. The other day I was thinking I needed a pair of socks. My choices were Nordstrom and Target. Because I can't drive to Northgate anymore. I can't even take the light rail there easily. There's nothing there. So I want to encourage you to get the retail back.
Yeah, it's one of our bigger weaknesses right now, and it was a challenge pre-pandemic. We were losing stores prior to 2020, as national retailers, the Banana Republics, the Old Navys, the Gaps, the J. Crews were contracting. They were pulling out of other markets. So it wasn't just a downtown Seattle challenge. It was a contraction of retail nationally. But brick and mortar is still alive and well. We can look across the lake and see how well the Bellevue collection's doing. We can look across Montlake Cut and see how well U Village is doing. And in a lot of ways, U Village is sort of ripped off and imitated. No criticism to them, but they've recreated an urban downtown shopping experience in a lifestyle center, and they've done it better than we are. It's outdoors, it's storefronts, it's cafe seating, it's great flowers, it's this walkability and the sidewalk experience. We need to recreate it here, and it's not an imitation here, it's the real thing. We need to get back to it by committing to those values and making it safe and clean and welcoming for everybody.
Can you mention any other projects besides the convention center that prove that we are progressing? I see lots of cranes, but I don't know what's happening.
So on the development side, most of the cranes you see in the air today are developing residential buildings. There's very few office buildings under construction. I think that's an okay thing because the demand for office is not strong right now. There is one office building being developed right by the convention center by Hudson Pacific Properties. But most of the cranes in the air are apartments and condos, mostly apartments. On the infrastructure side, a lot of investment in light rail and transit, the waterfront, etc. The remake of Memorial Stadium at Seattle Center with about $65 million of public money being put on the table to create a new arena and stadium and music venue there. And certainly, what was done at Climate Pledge over the last couple of years. So really a historic amount of public infrastructure investment in residential. Office is going to be soft for quite some time. And we've got enough retail to deal with right now. We don't need to make new retail. There's some other smaller scale investments taking place. If you walk down Pike and Pine Streets today, you'll see the sidewalks sort of torn up. That's intentional to create a better walking experience, improve sidewalks connecting sort of 9th Avenue, the Paramount Convention Center down to the waterfront. So better landscaping, lighting, more cohesive experience. So that's a bit of a snapshot of kind of the development picture.
Given the occupancy of downtown Seattle office buildings, can you speak briefly to the local improvement district funding pledged for the waterfront project?
Yeah, so there was a district created 4 or 5 years ago, pre-pandemic, to assess properties within a certain area to help fund the improvements to the central waterfront project, with the notion that these properties are going to have an increase of value because of the park itself. And so the city was saying we're going to capture some of that value to invest in the capital improvements. So those property owners are committed to that level of investment. There were some that challenged the methodology for how the city projected the special benefits, and they were successful in challenging their assessment, and so it took $16 million or so off the top of what the total contribution was, but and there may be more challenges going forward, but that remains in place and is a funding mechanism to help complete the project. But we do, I think the basis of your question is, do we risk lower values in the office sector from lower occupancy rates? And that is certainly a risk if we don't see return to work get back to some modest level and people maintain their leases. Our vacancy downtown right now on the office side is about 25%, but projected to go higher than that, and that compares to where we were, and maybe a little higher than where we were during the Great Recession back in 2008, 2010-ish.
Question about 3rd Avenue. The mayor has talked about a new plan for 3rd Avenue. I kind of get why all the buses were put on 3rd Avenue. It makes it really handy if you're riding a bus and you need to switch or connect or whatever. But now it's just kind of a wreck. And I don't actually know what you can do differently. I can't imagine splitting all the buses up. What else do you do? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I would agree. It is kind of a wreck. And it's really been that way since the cut and cover tunnel was developed in the 90s. It kind of never recovered. The retail never recovered. In 2019, we developed a vision with local architecture firm, ZGF, to rethink that entire corridor, really from Seattle Center down to Pioneer Square, and to look at comparable transit corridors in other parts of the country. This is the busiest transit corridor. If you look at the total number of buses per hour, at least pre-pandemic, it was the busiest transit corridor in the nation as far as the number of buses. And so there's a lot of steel going through that space that doesn't create a great environment for everybody else. It's loud, it's noisy, it blocks your sight lines. So we put together a vision that came up with a couple of different options for how you really rebuild that whole thing from building storefront to building storefront, reduce the number of buses, think about how they get redistributed to other streets in downtown, like 2nd and 4th. We would do that bus lanes with some capacity. And then the fact that we're building light rail, and we've opened it to Northgate, and we're going to open it beyond and out east to Bellevue here in a couple of years, is going to mean less need for buses downtown. And the pandemic, in a lot of ways, has meant less need for buses downtown, at least during the peak periods, which don't exist like they used to, the morning peak and the afternoon peak. So we have opportunity to really rethink this street so that it is a street that we want to walk down and linger. We can rebuild retail. If you look at photos of that street from the 1940s and 50s, it was a great street. And back when it had a streetcar on it, and you look at all these little businesses and all this retail, and it was bustling, and we've lost it, but we can get it back. And the city has embraced the vision that we put together. It's on our website, and is committed to an action plan to figure out, okay, what's the ultimate concept and design that we want to build? How do we work with Metro to figure out where the buses go? And then how do we pay for it? And then there's some decisions and actions too to make on the private sector side. So the buildings themselves, rezoning and other incentives to maybe add residential where we've got 3 stories of retail, and to get more density into that part of downtown. The zoning and capacity restrictions are pretty limited in some parts of the retail core. So there's active conversations among some of the ownership there with the city, and the city with the county and us, to try to create a much better street that exists there today.
Along those lines, what's the plan for Pacific Place?
There you are.
What's the plan or vision for Pacific Place?
So it's owned by Madison Marquette. They bought it from the Pine Street Group back in 2016. They put a bunch of money into it prior to the pandemic. They had a good number of interested parties ready to sign on the dotted line for new leases. And then the pandemic hit and sort of threw all of that out of whack. They had it on the market to sell it for a period of time over the last year. Some folks looked at building on top of it because it's got zoning capacity. You could put a hotel or some other use on top. I don't think they got the level of interest that they had hoped for. So they're back to looking at transactions and deals. I know that they've been showing some of those spaces to different retailers and interested parties. It's a lot of space, and I think the indoor mall in a downtown has always been kind of challenging. Most people, if you're coming to a downtown to shop, you want to be on the street, and that's what sort of our bread and butter has always been. That's what U-Village has done, right? And we've got, as I noted earlier, a lot of retail space in the country, in our city, and in the downtown. And so I don't think what happens on the top floors of Pacific Place is gonna, set the direction of the downtown retail experience for the decades to come. I think it's important. We want good uses up there, but we ought to be focused on filling the ground floor. And those are the desirable spaces, and I think if we can start there, get the ground floor of Pacific Place back going again, and maybe the upper floors become something else. Maybe they're a school, maybe they're childcare, maybe they're other uses. I think that's okay. I don't think if it's not apparel or traditional retail, that's going to be some death sentence for the retail core of our downtown. We ought to be focused at the street level, getting those ground floors full, and the upper floors will take care of themselves, and maybe there's some other uses there, and that's okay.
Yeah, John, I'm impressed with what the things that are being planned, and some things are already underway. But we have a city council election coming up here with quite a few seats at stake in this election. The city's a key player. As they come here to present their case to or Horizon House and other places around town, what questions should we be asking them about, and what kind of commitment should we be getting out of our council candidates?
Great question. We've got 7 of 9 council members up for election this November. We've got 4 or so that have said they're not running for re-election. And we've got about 50 candidates that have filed or said that they're going to file. And I think we've got some good options in each of these districts. We've been trying to recruit candidates, talk to candidates, meet with them, talk about downtown, understand their interests. And I've been impressed with sort of the crop out there. We've got a few options in each of these districts. And what I would ask them, one, what are your priorities? And 2, how will you support the revitalization of downtown? And these are district elections, and these are not the at-large. There's 2 at-large council members. They're not up this election. It's all the folks representing districts. And most of the districts don't, touch downtown, but their constituents do, as employees or customers or coming to a hockey game. And so there is an interest there. Sometimes they forget that, though. The elected officials or the candidates, that is. So I think asking them, what's your priorities, and how will you support the revitalization of downtown? What's your plan? What are the actions you're willing to take and support? And we'll be doing the same. We put together a questionnaire, we send it to all the candidates, we ask them to fill it out, we ask them to send it back, and then we rate them against our priorities as far as how aligned they are. And then we make that information available to all of our members and the media and others. And I think this will be a really critical election for the future of our city. I think we've upgraded to a notable degree in the council we have now versus the one we had a couple of years ago, and I'm more encouraged by this one, but we know that 4 aren't running again, so there's kind of a wide open opportunity here for more civic leaders that share in our interests and priorities.
I have a question for you. I'm relatively new to the West Coast and came without children, and I hear you talk about businesses and apartment buildings going up and condos. Where are the children going to go to school, and where do they go now? Are there schools in that area?
So there's no public school, K through 5, 8, or high school, with the exception of the center school at Seattle Center, which is a pretty small format school, but really no public elementary or middle school in the downtown. It's an issue, a priority that we've been advocating for quite some time with the school district, because the number of kids and families and overall residents in downtown has been doing this over the last 15 years in particular. And pre-pandemic, the school-age population downtown was growing so fast that it was overfilling John Hay, which were the elementary school on top of Queen Anne, that downtown kids were assigned to, and they had portables there, and it was overcrowded. So then the school district moved all the downtown kids to Lowell up on North Capitol Hill, so that's where the downtown kids go now. There's not much more capacity at Lowell beyond who's there today. And then the other school that serves a portion of downtown for kids living south of Yesler is Bailey Gatzert up on Yesler Terrace. That's going to fill up as the Yesler Terrace project and all the housing that's going up there gets completed. So there's not a lot of good options. And we've pointed out many ideas for the school district over the years. You could lease space in an office building, and there's a fair amount of space to lease right now and interested office owners. The Federal Reserve Bank building was surplus by the government years ago, and we said, let's look at that. And we toured them through it, and it went to auction, and they bid, but they got outbid by a developer. We said the area in Belltown where the ramps, the off-ramps or on-ramps, I can't remember, for the viaduct were removed at First and Battery would be a great space, and the city owns that land, and what if the city made it available for the district? And they have done that, and the school district has an option on that land at First and Battery, which there's designs for a K-8 school with a park on top that's pretty cool, actually. So they have an 8-year, I think, option on that land. And then Seattle Center is another opportunity, and the district and city are engaged in the revitalization of Memorial Stadium. So we've re-engaged the school district. I've had 2 meetings with their leadership in the last 2 months. Their enrollment citywide is down from what it was pre-pandemic as families have made decisions to take their kids out of public school and go to independent schools. But we know that their enrollment eventually will get back up at some point. We know that the options to serve downtown right now are pretty limited with Lowell and Bailey Gatzert and John Hay, and the cost to expand the capacity at those schools is very expensive. They did an analysis when they were looking at the Federal Reserve Bank building and whether they were going to go in there. What would it take just to create the same capacity in those other buildings? And it was a lot more on a per pupil basis. So we think this issue is still legitimate. We need a public school. You look at downtowns across the country, and most of them have public schools. And we've also talked about some of the skills centers that are in high schools around the city. You know, like the culinary skills and other trades that they've got in some of the high schools. Could you consolidate those in one building downtown? You've got great transit access for high school kids. They could all get to one place. So we're having those conversations. We just chatted again, I don't know, 2 weeks ago. We're meeting again in another 3 weeks. I've been working on this for 12 years. I thought my kids might have some opportunity to go to this school, but they won't. But I hope kids of the future will. It's kind of a no-brainer to me, and the growth is still there. Families want to live downtown. We've got a lot of kids downtown.
I think that we're past 8:30. Do people still want to stay and ask questions? Yeah. We probably should. We didn't. John, how much more time do you have?
I'm good. I'm good. But if you need to leave, I won't be offended. So.
That's okay.
Just so you know.
Back to the fentanyl crisis, which I think you characterized very well. And the issue, of course, is how is that going to get implemented? You mentioned that everyone came together in COVID and cooperated, so what's preventing that from happening now?
I think that's a good question. I think people are maybe timid and scared to take this on because they don't know what to do. I think the politics around drugs is certainly more complicated, even with all the politics we had around COVID. I mean, I think this community was pretty aligned around what to do about COVID. Certainly the country certainly wasn't, but I think this community was. And it made it easy for the politicians to get out there and say, this is what we want you to do, and this is what we're doing, and we're going to stand up this, and we're going to stand up that. And it wasn't easy work from the implementation of what they had to do, but politically it was popular, and they all got a lot of credit for it. And the favorabilities for our politicians were really high in that period, particularly because people here were so frustrated with what wasn't happening at the national level, and all of that. So I think politically that was an easier fight and thing to take on. And this one's a bit more complex given the history in this country with drugs and the war on drugs and incarceration. And I think there's a lot of people that don't know what to do. And I think the comparisons in some ways between locking up people for smoking marijuana 30 or 40 years ago and what we're seeing today, which is people dropping dead on the sidewalks in the middle of our city, it's a false equivalency. We're dealing with a different product and a different poison. And we have to have a different mindset around it. And the cost to human life, the cost to our emergency system, the economic costs are significant. And I think we do have to take some different approaches. And we have people peddling poison out on the sidewalks and people using it and taking it against their better judgment and killing themselves. And if we had a business, we had a restaurant in the middle of downtown during COVID, when everything was shut down and you had all these restrictions and the governor said you can't do this, you can't do that. But if we had a restaurant that had their doors open and we're inviting people inside and getting people sick and getting people into the hospital and killing them, the government would take an action to shut the restaurant down. But we have our sidewalks being used today to peddle poison that's killing people, and collectively, as a community, as a city, as a municipal government, we're all just walking right by it. So I think we have to have a totally different mindset for what we're dealing with. because the trend line is a really, really scary one.
Plymouth Church down in, right down the block, a couple blocks down here, is in the midst of considering what to do with that building. And wonder if you got some thoughts about what we at Plymouth Church might do with that building. Anybody talking with you about that? And I've always thought of it as an area where a school, you know, could be use that space, among other things.
I love that idea. Let's make it happen. Housing, a school, those are things we need.
Question way over there.
What is the future of the old convention center?
It will still continue to serve meetings and events, and the beauty of having these two buildings that aren't attached is, you know, previously when we'd have an event at the convention center, you have the down days for load in, and then you have the down days for load out for these bigger conventions. So the building kind of sat dormant there. And so now we kind of get a fire on both, you know, cylinders where one building can have a convention while one building's loading, or they both can be booked for a big convention. But they're really going to mostly serve independent conventions that can be here at the same time, that can be loading out, moving things in on different days. So it's still very much relevant. It's about the same size as the new convention center facility, and is still, you know, well booked out into the future.
John, the corner, the famous corner of 3rd and Pike, Walgreens and Ross Dress for Less, and then half a block away, Target. How do you work with those major corporations?
Well, it's really the property owners of those buildings, which a number of them are local, some are regional, and there are some active conversations with them and the city about potential rezoning. That's an area of town where the height restrictions are kind of limited, where you can't build up. So there's some conversations of, you know, would it be helpful if we could allow some extra height and you could put residential on top of the old IGA Crest where TJ Maxx was, or above Wild Ginger, for instance. So there's some active conversations there, which I think would help just to create a better environment for the street. And if we're going to rebuild 3rd Avenue from storefront to storefront, it'd be good to have new investment, new energy in some of these buildings too. So I think we're in a place where those conversations are more real than they've ever been between the city and the property owners.
This is kind of a homey question, but assuming that there are going to be more families such as yours living downtown with kids, where did your children play, and where are the plans for more play areas for children?
So we moved downtown in 2012 from Madison Valley. We were in a townhome, and we kept putting our kids in the car and loading all the stuff in the strollers, and then we would drive to the Seattle Art Museum, the Science Center, the aquarium, and then you'd have to get all the junk in the car out of the car and put them from the car seat into the stroller, and then they're crying and you're wrestling with them, and you go through all that. And so my wife was taking a job downtown at the time at the Polyclinic, and I was already working downtown, and they were starting preschool downtown, and we said, why are we doing this thing where we put them in the car with all the stuff and we drive to the place downtown to spend the Saturday? Why don't we just move downtown? So those are the places we would go. And it was a lot easier once we moved downtown, because we just rolled out of the apartment onto the monorail, and we went to the Science Center, we went to the Children's Museum, we ate in the Armory, once the new playground there, which I think is the best playground in the city, was developed, we went to the playground, we went to the Art Museum, and we walked everywhere. Or we just go on the streetcar on like a Sunday morning, and I get a cup of coffee, and I would just park them in a seat, and I would just sit there because I got a break. And they just love the streetcar, and we just ride it back and forth from South Lake Union. So we thought we were like living the dream as parents of the amenities and activities for kids downtown. And yeah, we need more outdoor space. I don't mean to poo-poo that. The waterfront is going to be phenomenal for kids. And that space originally was designed, I'm not kidding here, with no playgrounds. No playgrounds. And there was a great effort that we helped organize of families and parents that lobbied, and so there's going to be some amazing playgrounds down there and slides and this huge play structure that hangs out over the water, and so that is going to be a pretty cool place. Not right over the water, but on the water. We're not going to lose kids into the bay. But those are the places we went. Lake Union Park is another. We take our kids sailing at the Center for Wooden Boats and go play in the park there. But so we've got great existing assets for kids, but there's a lot, we need more. I mean, there's no place to play basketball. There's no basketball hoops. We should have pickleball. We should have all those more outdoor play areas. But we've got a good amount for families and kids, especially for indoor activities when it's not so nice.
You mentioned that early on in the video that some of your ambassadors are there to provide security, but they're not police officers. What exactly do they do?
So we contract with Iron and Oak, a private security firm. So it's not the folks in the yellow jackets that you saw in the video. It's the folks in the black vests that I think are also in the video. We have about 14 of them on staff on a daily basis. So they wear body cameras, they don't carry guns, they do carry mace, they can detain people, they will interrupt fights and assaults, they will call the police, and that often results in different arrests. They provide medical aid, because sometimes they're the first people on scene. There was a shooting at 2nd and Pike a couple of Fridays ago. They were the first people on scene, so they'll put tourniquets on somebody. They administer Narcan as well. And we got into this line of work or investment or whatever you want to call it because our ambassador teams were getting assaulted on the streets during the pandemic. We had 48 assaults, verbal and physical, from stabbings, guns pulled, nobody shot thankfully, but stabbings, guns pulled, punched, maced, and then verbal assaults or somebody throwing something at them. So we started investing in the security mostly for their safety so they could do their work, cleaning, taking care of alleys, taking graffiti off, etc. in a safe way. But the security also provides a general presence and then is carrying out those activities I described and then responding to property owners. Ideally, the Seattle Police Department would rebuild its staffing and refill 550 positions that are vacant. We don't want to continue to fund security in perpetuity, but in the meantime, we feel it necessary for the safety of our team, and our customers and stakeholders believe it's important too.
John, that's good. It's been really great, and we thank you for coming, and maybe in a year we'll see what you've accomplished. All right. So thank you.
I welcome the opportunity.